All right. Okay, cool. Right. So, firstly, once again, thank you very much for attending. All right. This is the third year running of the Direct Access 1.0 music production workshop. Okay. So, you guys are like the third batch lah. Right. Kira the third batch of the students. All right. So, as you all have introduced yourself, you all come from different backgrounds, and that's really, really good. And I'm really looking forward to the next the next 5 sessions lah, right? Today is week 1, and then we have another 6 weeks to go, another 5, and then making 6 weeks in total lah, this session. Okay, very, very cool. So we're gonna do as I mentioned, you save your Q&As maybe for later, write down your question. I'm just gonna go straight into the topics. Okay, all right. So the first topic I'm gonna go into, right, is called Music Production 101. Okay, so what's Music Production 101? Let's talk about it, right? So many people always, especially when we talk about the different roles of inside music production, there are different roles. You have the producer, you have engineers, so everyone plays a different role. Okay, but nowadays, of course, in this day and age, 2020, the roles have kind of start to blur, right? In the past, last time, you always very, very clearly you have engineer is engineer, producer is producer, the technician is technician, right? It used to be very clear one, but now the lines are kind of a little bit blurred already. It's more of a gray area between the two, lah, right? But it's still important to always recognize what music production is, lah. Okay, what different roles are. So the first thing you want to sort of really understand as a whole, music production is a process. Okay, so let's take a look at what the music production process is. The first initial stage, right, I would categorize it as the pre-recording, right? Pre-recording here meaning that before you even set foot into the recording studio, before you even record a single bar of music, right? You're pre-recording and your planning. There are a couple of questions and a couple of points that you want to plan. Okay, this is when you write out your planner for your project. So, are you recording a single, or are you recording an EP, or are you going to be recording an album? Right? It's important to know what your goal is and what you are setting out to record. Okay, is it a single? Is it an EP? Or is it an album? Number 2, right, you need to choose your material, i.e. your songs. And how many songs? Let's say, obviously a single is one song, but when we choose a material, right, when we want to release a single, it does not mean that you only write one song. You know what I mean? You see, the biggest mistake, all right, I would use the word mistake, or maybe a weakness of a lot of artists, a lot of singer-songwriters, a lot of bands is that they don't write enough. They don't write enough music. They don't write enough songs. When they target and say, let's say, oh, we're going to record an EP of 5 songs. They just write 5 songs, and then cukup quota, that's enough. That's the right enough quota. Stop. Then they don't write anymore already. Problem with that is that they are limiting themselves to only those 4 or 5 songs, and they are ruling out the potential of maybe they have even better material to come. If you're putting out if you're targeting to put out a single, you should be writing at least 4 or 5 songs, and deciding from there, right, as a producer, right, to pick the best song out of 5. If you're writing an EP, you should write at least 10 songs, right? You should have 10 songs. The band should have written 10 songs. Then only you pick the best 4, best 5 out of it. Same goes, man. If you're writing an album, right, the band should write like 20 or 30 songs. Then only you will narrow it down, right, and pick the best 10. Okay, so if we talk about, let's say, in the top 20 market, the top 20 scene, right, in the big music cities such as like LA, New York, or Nashville, or something like that, the way that they choose and the number of demos that they write and they run through, and the number of songs that actually end up on the radio or actually end up being on the process is very very few. You know, so from the 100 songs that you hear on the Billboard Top 100, like for example, there could have been 500 songs, 1,000 demos that have been done and by various songwriters, producers, but only the best, right, gets picked. So that's kind of the what I mean by the weakness, lah, right? The kind of the sort of shortcomings when it comes to most independent, especially independent lah, independent producers. They just write enough and then they don't write more than that. Okay, right? The focused songwriting is very very important. Okay, now the third point when it comes to your planning is: are you going to record? Are you going to mix? Are you going to master at a professional studio, or are you going to go the DIY route? Okay, this is the question you have to answer, right? Because it will affect the points to come as well. Point number 4, and this is very important. Okay, do you hire a producer or are you going to self-produce? So you have to decide whether are you going to hire someone to produce for you, okay, or are you going to take on the responsibility yourself? Because that's very important. Every project needs to have a producer, okay? Now, that producer may or may not realize that he or she is a producer, and then I'll get down to the point later on why that is the case. But it's always important. Every project needs a head, lah. There needs to be a leader. Another second shortcoming, another sort of a weakness or sort of shortcoming of a lot of projects, right? Independent ones, sometimes even major label ones as well. Right? Sometimes because of not many not when it comes to major label, it's not because there is no producer. Sometimes too many producers. Okay, that can be a bad thing as well, right? But when it comes to, let's say, independent or the projects that most bands or people who do it, is that no one takes the leadership position of being a producer, right? So I see that happen quite a lot lah, and sometimes it's because of budget, it's because of budgetary reasons, and that's fine, that's okay, that's not a problem, okay, right? It's understandable, but in the end, someone always needs to step up to take the responsibility lah, right? I'll talk a little bit more about that. Okay, now coming to, and this is especially when it's important related to when you're working with bands and when you're working with musicians, rehearsals and your pre-production, these are the most important, right? And I can't emphasize more, these are the most important aspects of this whole pre-recording and your planning stage. Okay, no there's a saying that goes, okay, the more time you spend in your pre-production, your rehearsals, your pre-production, working on your arrangement and stuff like that, the less time you will waste when you actually get into a studio, right? Because time is money, right? If you're hiring a studio, if you decide to hire your own, hire a studio to record your stuff, time is money, man. It's going by an hourly rate, and even if you are doing it DIY, or if you are doing it at your comfort of your own home studio, if you take too much time, you waste time, from your life, which you could be doing other things more productive lah. Okay, and then even if you're doing it at home, there is still cost involved, overheads, your utilities. All right, okay, cool. So rehearsals and pre-production is really, really important. And I have already been to the band which I'm going to be featuring. Okay, I'll introduce the band later on. Okay, I've already also gone through the pre-production rehearsals with them lah. Before this, I think I had a meeting. We had a pre-production meeting first, and then we went and did a little rehearsal at their own home studio. So we did a rehearsal, and then we did a final pre-production round. All right, over inside the studio lah. Okay, so you see, that was the pre-production process that I did with the band. Okay, now let's go. So what is the pre-production? You always hear the word, right? Pre-production, pre-pro, right? Have you ever heard the term pre-pro? Oh, well, let's do pre-pro first. Oh, we are doing, some artists will say, oh, we are in the process of doing our pre-pro now. So pre-production, I would argue, right, and this is my opinion, your pre-production stage is the most important stage of the entire process, right? I would argue it's more important than recording. I would argue it's more important than the mixing. I also argue it's more important than the mastering and everything. All right. So my emphasis, I always tell everyone, your pre-production stage is the most important stage of the entire process. So as I mentioned earlier, the more work done here during the pre-production stage, the less work you need to do in the studio. The less work, the less time, less money lah, okay, that you need to spend. Right. So during the pre-production, as I mentioned, okay, you want to listen to all the demos, right? So if you are a band, if you're a singer-songwriter, you've written all the songs, listen to all of it, okay? Put out all your material, right? And then you select the songs. So when I work with any band, right, who comes to me and say, "Oh, I want to produce a single," and then you say, "Okay, this is the song we want to we want to release. We want you to help us to produce this one song." I will very immediately always ask them back, "Do you have other songs? Right? Can you show me all your songs, no matter how raw or how rough you think it is, or how you think maybe the song sucks or you don't like the song? I want to hear it. I want to hear all of it." Because here's the thing, all right? You as a songwriter, as the artist, as the musician, you have you have the emotional and the mental attachment to your material and to your songs already. You really immediately, you have your favorite already. Oh, this is my favorite, this one, I don't like. You have your, it's like you have your favorite kid and or your favorite relative, and then you have the makcik, the auntie, which very very irritating. Okay, that you don't want to see, right? Okay, all right. So that's an analogy. But coming in as a producer, especially if you're going to be working with other artists and you're working with other bands whatsoever, you are coming in from a third party and unbiased neutral point of view. And because of that, you will sometimes you will realize and you will notice that there are some other songs which have potential, some other songs which may even have better potential than the one they approach you with. All right. So I always would want to do that. Okay. So because I don't want it to go to waste lah. So they may not realize that they may have something great inside this one raw demo that maybe we could work on and develop instead of that one song that they started out planning on producing lah. Okay. So listen to all the demos, right? And then select the songs, okay? Like through this process of the direct access, I think it was like 50 plus songs I had to listen to, right? Which is okay, which is all right, because I think sidetrack again a little bit. Recently, they did the Anugerah Lagu Indie. It was like 600 songs when they had to listen to, so it's like okay, all right. So for me, I'm not complaining lah. 50 songs is okay lah, right? 600 songs listening, I'll be like, at the end of the day, I'll go crazy, go nuts, man, right? Listening to 600 songs. All right, okay. So next stage. Okay, once you have picked the song or pick the song or songs that you are going to produce, definitely get into the rehearsal, right? Get to know the band, get to know the artist, get to know right, get to know their strengths, get to know their weaknesses. This is very very important time, especially spending the time with a band, especially. Okay, because nowadays in this day of age, sometimes bands send you demos which the drums are programmed, programmed already. So it's like, oh wow, okay. So you think that everything's really really perfect. So that's why the rehearsal session, when you actually go and meet the band or you meet the artist, you want to listen to the singer, you want to listen to the vocalist, and really hear how the band sounds like live. Okay, because nowadays with a lot of production software which is very very easy, demos can sometimes sound a lot better than what they can actually deliver lah. Okay, so sometimes you're like, "Phew, demo sounds fantastic, man," but when live is like, "Ayo, koyak," right? right? Then you okay lah. Then you have to spend a lot more time. You have to tell them, okay, we need to spend more time. You need to practice more, rehearse more. Maybe if the vocalist has some issues, right, take lessons. Go and take some vocal lessons with a vocal coach, right? Spend that extra time, right? Delay the project a little bit until they're really, really ready before hitting the studio, right? Because if you don't want to be surprised, you think that, oh, okay, this band, no problem lah. You book the studio, go recording session there, and you find out, alamak, you cannot play with a click. Then sorry, right? Right, you will have a lot of fun time in the studio then, okay? Right, so rehearsal very important. Get to know the band, get to know the musicians, get to know the singer, know their weaknesses, know their strengths, and identify that very early on lah. Again, pre-production before you enter the recording studio. Okay, right. So when it comes to the song, okay, we want to determine the tempo, right? It's very important. Okay, tempo, the key, the parts, okay, parts here referring to drum parts, okay, what the pattern, what's the pattern like, what are the bass parts, okay, what the bass lines are the bassist is playing, guitar parts, rhythm, the lead lines, fill-ins, all that needs to know, right? And then song form lah, right? Song form means the song structure, okay? So this is very important, especially when you talk about tempo. Sometimes the band plays at this certain tempo, or sometimes they're not very consistent in terms of the tempo. So we work out an experiment, play, right? Take a metronome or something like that. Try and speed up the song and see, right? Speed up the song or slow it down. And if you find the sweet spot, don't just because they send you the demo, right? And then it's already at that tempo, you feel that okay lah, we'll just go with it, right? Experiment and see. Try and push the song faster, see how it feels. Sometimes you find that the energy is much better if we kind of speed it up by just one. It's very surprising, you just speed it, you change it from 120 to 121 or 122. Suddenly the energy level is different. It can make a big difference just bumping up a song, right, 1 or 2 BPM, okay? And key, okay, I can't overemphasize this, right? For the vocalist, for the singer, okay, you always want to make sure you are selecting the right key and the performance for the vocalist lah, okay? Right. Sometimes in this day and age, right, of a lot of this reality TV programs and reality singers and all that. So some people have that unrealistic expectation that, oh, they're gonna sing in that super high key and the really, really acrobatic vocal performance. It's sometimes not relevant, and it's not applicable to be it's not relevant for the song that they're doing, you see, right? And then so select the right key, right? For the vocalist, for the singer, right? You want him to be able to consistently perform it, not only during the recording, but in my opinion, and this is my opinion lah, right? Live as well, okay? Right? You don't want to. It's kind of sucky that if you do the song in the studio in D, but then live you have to turn it down to C because the singer cannot handle it. Okay, so you should be able to handle it lah anytime lah, right? Is there a question?
Yeah, JD. I got a question to ask.
Mm-hmm.
All of us can share this together.
Yeah.
How do you tell the singer that he or she is singing out of tune?
How do you tell a singer is singing out of tune? I just tell it straight, man. If I'm a producer, there's no holds barred lah. Okay, when it comes to being a producer, there's already that understanding. There's already that understanding that I will be 100%, be honest, be truthful, right? So because in the end we are trying to serve and deliver that service, so we need to be honest, we need to be upfront, okay, and just tell the singer that you are right, that he or she is singing out of tune lah. Now there are of course complex politics that may be involved. Now if it is of course a much more um, um, established singer, you might need to go through a manager or an A&R or something like that. But this is where, like I said, the pre-production is important. You already identify these issues early on before you want to avoid all these pitfalls. So you get into it, okay? You get to know the band, you determine all these things beforehand, all right? And also that's where the pre-production is important. it's where you can kind of filter out. You already know already in pre-production that okay, looks like this band it's not really gonna cut it lah, right? And at that stage, you can before you commit any further, you can decide lah, yeah, you can decide to say maybe I'm not interested to produce in this project lah, right? So you have to be careful as well as if you're going into any sort of production project to choose your talent wisely, okay, right? Because not necessarily you want you every job comes and then you take it, right? And it's okay, right, because sometimes you need to choose your projects also lah, right? Okay, because how yeah, because the outcome, not only do you get the stress, you want to avoid unnecessary stress, but actually the outcome is also part of your portfolio now. If you are working with with a crappy artist, or a band that's not very experienced, and then the end result turns out that way, it looks bad on you, right? And but people don't know, right, that it's because the band's not experienced, okay, right? Maybe it's because of that, or the singer is not so good. They always look back, oh, studio mana, which the engineer, who's the producer, siapa yang buat. Oh, okay. Yeah, they come up with this product, right? Product yang tak bagus, not a good product lah. Okay, so that's very, very important. Okay, right. So and especially key lah. Got lots of stories also lah, right? And of doing, you already record the music, and then if you never did the pre-production with the singer and all that, suddenly when it comes time to vocal, then they call you, can we change the key? Half step. It's like, oh my god. Okay. Right. If it's MIDI, you're doing programming, okay lah, no problem lah, right? Okay. Just just transpose, okay. But if you're recorded live instruments, your bass, your guitars, everything, then how? Okay. No choice, when you have to do it again, man. All right. All right, cool. So tempo, key parts, your song form, etc. Okay, right. Determine all these things in the pre-production. Song form meaning the structure, lah. Right, your intro, verse, everything. Okay, chart your progress. Okay, what I mean by this, and I find it very useful as well. Okay, but especially if I'm doing a bigger project like an EP or an album, it's always good to chart your progress. And let me see, is it inside the? Okay, I'll show you at the end of it. All right, what I mean by an example of a little chart, a progress chart. A progress chart is useful, is helpful. Let me just go back to that. Okay, right. Progress chart will be helpful, will be useful because it helps you visualize your progress. It makes you feel it helps you and the band um um visually know how the process is, how the progress. It makes you feel that, okay lah, we're getting work done, okay? Especially if you're doing a big project like an EP or an album, you won't feel like, oh, it's such a long stressful process. You're going to go get through all this. You see a progress chart, all right? Psychologically, it actually helps. It helps to motivate the musicians. It helps to motivate you as an engineer. I love to put, if I'm working with a band and doing EP, right, I will always stick up a progress chart in the album so that they can see. I'll show you an example at the end of these slides lah, right, of what one of the progress charts that I did. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, still in the music production process. Now, so before that, that was the pre-production, all right, and all the planning process. Now we are hitting and getting into the studio, okay? So now we're stepping foot in the studio already. So the actual production process itself, lah. The recording, editing, mixing, and mastering, okay? These are basically the 4 stages, lah. Some people will always say include marketing nowadays, lah. Marketing, right? But to me, marketing is different. So, what do you want to do inside the production process? Okay, you want to record. Let's say if you book a studio, the main things that you definitely want to capture, right? Would be the rhythm, or what we call the bed lah, the foundational tracks. So the rhythm tracks such as the drums, the bass, and whatever your main rhythm instruments lah, rhythm guitar whatsoever. Of course, nowadays, right, home recording is a lot more affordable. Equipment is a lot more affordable. So Sometimes maybe, people maybe go to a studio and they just record the drums only, right? So maybe you have projects, and then maybe depending on the budget, right? Maybe you just need a studio to record your drums. Okay, everything is flexible lah. There are no rules. There's no hard rules. Okay. Now, guide tracks, right, are optional. Okay, so guide tracks in this sense is, for example, if what we're going to do in this workshop, right, in the context of what I'm going to show you guys later, is we are going to be using guide tracks. Okay, so guide tracks would be tracks that we've already recorded previously as a guide for the actual recording session. So, for instance, today, we're gonna have the record. We're gonna record the drums. So before that, I already had the band. We already did a pre-recording, guide track recording session at my studio. We already did and prepared all that all in advance already, so that on the day itself, the drummer will have a good idea lah, right, because if you just ask him to just play to click track, that's a bit awkward. That's a bit weird. Okay, you just follow the tempo, you memorize the structure, everything in your heads. Now, granted, there are actually some drummers who like to do that way, so that's where you get to know the band lah, right? There are some drummers who I know, right, who work actually that way. All they need is click track, structure, everything. Wow, all already memorized inside the head already. So that one I really give the hats off to them lah. Or if you do not want to use guide tracks, you can also get the whole band in if you want to, right? Set the whole up, but this is also determined conditional that of course the studio will have enough inputs, is equipped to record the whole band live together lah. So I also like working with that, getting the whole band into the studio, sending them up, set their bass up, set the guitars up, set the vocalist to do like a guide take, and have the whole band play together. But the focus is just recording, maybe let's say drums, right? Okay, I love to do that, right? If the band is if the band is interested in doing it, and if they have practice, have sufficient rehearsal lah, okay, right. So if the band is really tight, sometimes I would love doing it that way as well, because there's a difference between using guide tracks and having the band play and record live together. Is that there's actually a vibe, the drummer actually feels a different vibe when the whole band kind of plays together. How he maybe grooves is different from playing to a guide track, right? Because sometimes guide tracks may be a little bit too perfect, or something like that, especially if you have programmed some of the elements at home lah. Okay, so but again, flexible, whichever way you prefer to work, right? There's no hard and fast rules. You can decide, right? You want to work with a band live, you get them live together. You want to do a guide track, you want to prepare everything at home, also can. Okay, now obviously doing guide tracks is much faster, you save time. Okay, because you don't have to set up a whole band, you save time, but there's always pros and cons lah, right? Whichever way you want, there's no right, there's no wrong. Okay, now next we'll be going to overdubs. The term overdub here means that you have existing tracks, and then you are recording, you are overdubbing on top lah, right? So basically, when we do today we do our drum tracking session, and then next week we will be doing the bass overdubs. Now, so once all your recording is done, once all the overdubs are done, this will be the editing and your post-production process lah. Once the musicians have already gone back, right, they're done, they've recorded all their parts. So this is where you as the engineer and the producer will get down to sit down and decide. So some projects will need a lot of editing, some will not require a lot of editing. Some, you want to keep it a little bit raw, then you keep your editing and post-production to a minimum lah, right? But some, if it's a little bit more processed, if it's a little bit more polished production, then maybe there'll be a lot more of post-production work that's going to go into it. And you are going to watch, right, the whole entire workshop. I'm going to walk you through this entire stage lah, right? You're going to see all the recording, not only just the recordings, but all the editing, the post-production work that goes into the song as well. Okay, so now, right, mixing. Okay, this is one of my favorite topics to do. Here's where you need to decide also. Okay, do you want to mix it yourself? For example, if you're going to DIY, are you going to mix it yourself? or do you want to go with the same engineer? Same engineer here means that, okay, that throughout the whole project, right, that you use the same engineer to record and mix lah, right? Do you want to use that, or do you want to use a third party mixer? So third party mixer means that someone that was not involved in the recording, you just send the tracks over to them. Okay, so whichever process you think is most appropriate or most suitable. So why do we talk about why do I make a distinction between, let's say, same engineer, right, using the in-house or the project engineer, or using a third party mixer? Now, there is sometimes an advantage to using back the same engineer, provided the recording engineer has also experience as a mixer lah. Okay, all right. If you no experience at all, of course not lah, right? So there is sometimes a benefit, and that's actually was actually the most common thing with most records, right? Back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, even up to the early 80s, it was always the same engineer. Whoever was the recording engineer always will be the mixing engineer on the project one. That's usually the common theme, the common workflow. All right. It was not only until the 80s, either the late 70s or the mid 80s, where you know we start hearing the specialist mixing engineer. Only during the 80s did the that breed of engineers started coming into existence, into play. Usually, it will always be within that engineer, the same engineer who record. It will usually be the same engineer who work throughout the rest of the album one. Okay, so in the 80s, you had people that come out like Bob Clearmountain, who is probably the first most and well-known specialist mixing engineer lah. Then of course you have the famous ones nowadays like Dave Pensado, you have Chris Laudelch, Brendan O'Brien, all these fantastic guys lah. Okay, right. So you need to decide, right? Are you going to use the same engineer, or are you later on down the line going to send it over to a third party, right, mixing engineer to work on? Now, the final stage, right, in this music production process is mastering. Okay. Now, I've written it in bold because this is my belief, right, and my very, very strong belief and very, very strong opinion, lah. Okay. So again, it's an opinion, right? It's not necessarily, it's not a fact. It's what I strongly believe, and what a lot of most of professional producers and mixing engineers still believe this to be true, and the right way to do it. Okay, right. Mastering, if possible, if budget allows, you should always hire a specialized and dedicated professional mastering engineer. Okay. Now, the reason behind it is I use this analogy. Okay, mastering is a very specialized job. It's a specialized process. You need very specialized tools. You need the best tools. You need the best equipment. All right, your converters, the best outboard gear to do the mastering work. You need the best room. You need very accurate monitoring and accurate acoustics, and you need someone who has the ear and the experience of doing the work lah. You would not go to a GP, like a general doctor or a medical officer. If you want to do brain surgery, you wouldn't do that, right? And then the second reason why as well. Now, for myself, if I am mixing a project, okay, I am within my rooms, with my equipment I have, with whatever skill set and my ears and the monitoring, I have made it sound as good as possible, the best that it can sound already to me. All right, during the mixing process. How then, when you've already made it sound your best, can you make it sound better than your best through the mastering? So that is my rationale, okay, right? Well, obviously, for some of them who will watch this, we are recording this, right? Who may watch it or read a replay. There are some people who disagree with that opinion, with that notion, that they say, you are very old-fashioned, you can always master your own projects, right? Okay, we'll talk about mastering later on, that will come in week 6, okay, right? I don't want to cover so much about it, right? We'll talk about mastering later, right? But here, very important, right? Mastering should almost always, I encourage it as most of the time, to hire a specialized and dedicated mastering professional mastering engineer. All right, cool. So, okay, now, what is a producer then? Back to my earlier question. All right. So these are kind of what I want to sort of outline. Okay, the roles of a producer. So the producer is basically the person that's in charge of the entire project. He's in charge of all aspects of the project. As Hassan mentioned earlier, budget, the time, your personnel. Personnel means that are you going to hire engineers? Okay, do you, any sessionists, right? And all that. Okay, right. The product itself. Okay, the final end, the end product, right? And arranger lah. Okay, I should have put arranger a little bit earlier. Okay, product should be the final thing, right? Arranger, right, whether you need an arranger or whether you do it yourself. Okay, okay. Because there are different types of producers and different styles, and I'll outline that later. Okay, a producer's job is it's half organizational, half creative. 50% of it is keeping things organized. So yeah, as we talked about, your budget, your scheduling, contacting the musicians, right, contacting the people, and hiring who you want on the team. It's getting things organized. The other half is being creative, right? Putting in your musical, putting in you as a producer, your creative ideas into the project, right? So it's very important to realize and recognize these two. Okay, some producers just focus so much on the creative side, but they're very very bad at organizing things, in getting things, in pulling the team together, in getting the project moving forward. That's not a sign of a good producer, lah. Okay, right? Now, on the other hand, there are some producers who are very good at organizing stuff, pulling people, team together. They may not be very creative themselves, but sometimes they pull in the right people. And this right team and the right people can put out fantastic products. Okay, so producers are very, 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 very range as well. Okay, but to be a great producer, it's you will need to be both lah. You can be a good organizer, right, and a good someone who is very creative. All right. So, why I would say organizing is very important, and this is why. Okay. Good organization promotes exceptional creativity. And here's what I mean. If you come across as a very organized producer, right? Someone who has organized a session, everything is planned out. When there's a scheduling, you have all the people ready. When you get into the studio, pre-production, oh, everything is ready, everything is organized, mics, everything is set up and ready to go, right? You're not kelam kabut, you're not messy. When you work with the artist and the artist sees that, they feel like, wow, I'm really working with someone who's professional and organized. They are immediately in that state of mind and the situation where they feel very comfortable, very relaxed, and then they immediately are able to express and exhibit their full potential in terms of the creativity. If they come and you meet a producer who is like not on time, doesn't reply message, don't come, that doesn't plan everything. When you get to the studio, you meet them, everything is not ready, it's all messy and organized. They're already in that mindset of okay, this is not gonna go well. They're already in that kind of mood lah. They're not in the vibe already. Okay, so good organization is very important. Promotes exceptional creativity. Okay. Now, a producer, the job of a producer, very, very important to me, is to make the technology invisible. So this is where all the preparation and organization also comes in. When the singer is coming in, when your musician or the band is coming in, you want them to forget about all the equipment, about all the gear, whatever the flashing lights, right? You want all that. You want to keep all that side invisible. You want to make it feel invisible to them, because you don't want to be bogging them down with all technical things. Let them focus. Let the musicians, let the band focus on the creative aspects, on the songwriting, on the ideas, right? Don't bother them too much about okay. For example, let's try out all the preamps in the studio and see which one sounds best. Okay, right? Okay, maybe in the days of unlimited budgets, right? Especially in the 80s and the 90s, When the projects used to have a lot of budgets, you can block out the whole studio for 1 month or something like that to record an album. Okay, maybe can lah, right? Okay, you get the band in, you spend 1 day testing. Okay, let's test all the mics one by one and see which one sounds the best. Okay, but to be more realistic, in a more realistic situation, all right, you don't want to do that lah, because you are bogging the artist or the musician down with all the technical stuff, right? So make the technology invisible, which leads to the next point. It allows the artist to consider your performance lah, right? It allows that. You don't want them to be figuring out, oh, alamak, how to work the headphone and all this, and all that stuff. So they can focus 100% on their performance, on the playing, on their singing, etc. Now, a producer, obviously, right? You keep the team comfortable, okay? You keep everyone comfortable. You keep them working together. The job of a producer, and sometimes even an engineer as well, it's very often being a psychologist. Okay, you are a psychiatrist there. You are there you want to spend time with the band. You want to listen to you want to talk to them. You want to know their personality, right? You had them sit there. You are in the producer in your producer chair, and they are sitting in the sofa. It's exactly like going to a psychiatrist clinic and a therapy session, which is very often when I work with bands and work there. It's like that. It's like a therapy session for them. They get to work with you. They get to express their feelings, their ideas, and their emotions through their music. A producer needs to have a vision, right? Very important. Now, when you enter into a project, it's very important for you as a producer to have a vision already. You need to visualize what the end goal is going to sound like. Okay, maybe not 100% exactly right, how it should sound like, but you need to have some kind of vision, like a goal, an objective that you want to achieve. Okay, right. So with that vision, then you can deliver the leadership lah. Okay, because you are basically the captain of the boat lah, the captain of the ship, right? Whether the ship sinks or runs into an iceberg or runs aground, okay, it's really in the hands of the producer lah. So two main jobs, to break it down, all right, is two main jobs: organization and leadership. Okay, these are the two main jobs a producer needs to come into play. Okay, budget. Okay, let's go quickly into budget. Okay, budget. Number one, obviously, time is money. All right, that's a cliche, but it's very very true lah. Okay, now it's very important to always recognize and to identify a budget, even though I would say this, even though you're doing DIY, even though you're doing at home, right? Because it allows you to, a budget is very important because it allows you to gauge your progress, right? And recognize limits. That's very important, right? It having a budget allows you to gauge your progress. So for example, what I mean by that is that throughout the, let's say the project is going on, you are going to spend this amount of budget, but then you realize that, alamak, we are only at this certain point, but we already spent so much on the studio time and everything already. Then immediately okay, looks like we probably can't do a full album. We can maybe only do 6 songs because our budget is not going to allow for that. Or you have to come up with another plan lah, all right? Another alternate lah. Oh, looks like with this budget, the drum recording session is taking too long, right? Then you have to change your plan already. Maybe we can't afford to do the guitars in the studio. We have to do guitars and vocals at home, for example lah. All right. Either we have to change our plan, go to plan B or plan C, or put a certain limit. Okay. So how do you want to budget? Okay. There are different ways of budgeting, and you talk with different producers. They will have different ways. But very common lah in this day and age, in the 21st century, is that most projects, most jobs are going to go on either a per song or per project basis already, right? It's kind of like that. I charge based on that, right? As far as I know, most people I know charge based on this process lah. And even those who do charge, who list out an hourly thing, actually there's a calculation already, and they already calculated already, right? Again, going back to the earlier related to the choice of materials, it's always good to try to record more songs than you need. So for example, if your EP is 5, if you can try and aim for to do, let's say, 6 songs or 7 songs, Because sometimes there is always a possibility that, right, in the demo and pre-production, okay, great, these are the songs that we are going to go for already, okay? But sometimes in the studio, when you start recording the tracks, when you start recording the drums, you start recording, then you suddenly feel that, actually, the song, it's not really happening, lah. You know, during the demo, it sounded great. You know, the idea sounded great, but then when we started recording the proper song, it's not really working out. So, right, so you always have maybe an external. Either you call it off, you cut that song out, or you work on, you move to another alternative, lah. Right. So these are again optional, right? And also depending on your budget, lah. So how do you make a budget? Very important. If you come in a budget, you want to talk about your media costs, your hard disk, your CDs, your external drive. Okay, actually nowadays CDs and DVDs are all going extinct already. All right. Tape, if you are going to be recording in a studio, and that's very rare, that has analog tape, right? That's going to be very very rare, increasingly rare nowadays. You need to budget that factor in, okay, right? Because the tape usually you have to buy, right? For example, lah, okay, or some studios that I know actually in the West, right, in the Western, sometimes they will ask you to you bring your own hard disk to keep your data, because they won't keep the project song data here. No, right? They'll ask you to take the folder and keep that folder back home, right? Right? Because they, especially in the Western countries, lah, because they don't want to be responsible for the data, because they are not in the insurance or whatever. If their data lost or whatever, then after alamak, you go and sue me pula for losing your data, right? So sometimes that may play a role. Equipment rental, all right? Maybe you need to rent the amps, maybe you need to rent an instrument, maybe you need to rent this or that, okay? Engineer fees, maybe, okay, you need to pay the engineer, you need to hire an engineer, for example. Then obviously, the studio time, right? For your tracking, for your overdubs, or for your mixing, okay? And session musicians, if you need to hire musicians, okay, how much you need to pay them lah. Food and drinks, yeah, that's very important as well. If you are, um, I will always allocate, all right, factor in the food and drinks. Okay. Now, obviously, if they are in recording in my own studio, obviously lah, right, there's food and drinks always available. There's always drinks. There's some snacks, some light snacks available. And then when it comes time to go out for makan or something like that, senang lah, okay? We just go to mama together down the road or something like that, and then just belanja the band lah, pay for mama. Mama only mah, okay? It's not like we're going to go to some grill steakhouse or something like that, okay? So whenever you do a budget for any event, also always consider a little bit of food and drinks lah, food and water, because not only you want to think about yourself or the band, but also maybe you have crew. If let's say, right, especially important events, budget also lah for some food and drinks for your crew and for the people who are working under you. Okay, right. So miscellaneous. Okay, okay. Rehearsal studio. Okay, if you need to hire, you need to do some jamming sessions, you need to hire rehearsal studio, factor that inside that as well. Transportation. Okay, transport costs lor, toll, minyak, gas, or if some you need to fly in the artist from elsewhere. Hopefully that usually that should be the job of the management lah, or that lah, right? But if some big projects they give you this kind of budget and ask you to take care of all these things, you need to factor that in as well lah, okay, into your costing. Okay, per diems. Okay, per diems here. Again, this is mostly big projects lah. All right. So per diems means like a little small allowance for the artists, for the musicians, so that in this case, then they take care of themselves. You see, right? Their food and everything. So you give them a little bit of allocation. Okay, right. So that's making a budget. Okay, let's move on. How do you estimate studio time? Okay, very important. So this is related to budget as well. So, factors in question you need to ask yourself: how tight is the band? Okay, right. Are they strong players? Are they good players? Are they very, very consistent? Do they have good tone? So obviously, the better, the tighter the band is, you will know lah. You will need to spend much less time. You can estimate already how much time, right, is going to be needed for each session. Okay, now then the singer. Does he or she need guidance? There are some singers who are very natural. You just put them in front of mic, ask them to do poop poop, 2 takes, 3 takes, a few takes, and you're done. There are some singers on the other hand, you need to guide them one by one, line by line. You need to guide them. You need to do like, record multiple takes, right? And then com the takes. So there are some singers who need that, right? So be aware. Again, this is where you get to know the band. You get to know what their respective personalities and their character and how they work like lah, right? So moving on. Again, obviously, number of songs lah. How many songs are you talking about? What's the length of the songs? Are we talking about typical like short 3 minute, 4 minute radio formula kind of a songs, or are you dealing with a progressive rock band that's doing like a 20 minute longer, song or something like that? Okay, all right. Now, are the arrangements, are they simple or are they complex? So obviously, simple arrangement, very fast, can be done very quickly. Complex, maybe you got string, you got have to have a string section, have horn players lah, or maybe some other additional instrument. You need to put in an accordion or a flute or something like that. Obviously, you need to budget more time for that lah. So any editing required, all right, this is very important as well. So later in your post-production during the editing, okay, this editing work very often, because this takes time. So some engineers and some studios, at least I know I myself, as in when I take on a project, if there needs to be any editing work, you need to pay the engineer to do the editing work. Or if you want to do it yourself, right, then save money lah. Okay, you take the project home, you edit and do all the post-production yourself at home lah. Okay, rental. So, right, do you need to rent, or in certain situations, can you borrow? Right? Can you pinjam? You can call your friends, call favor, call other bands. You say, hey, can I borrow this? Can I borrow that? Very often, you're right. When it comes to these kind of things, a lot of stuff and equipment you sometimes can borrow. For from friends or other bands or other producers or other studios. You just credit them lah and say, thank you. When the song is out. Right, cool. You're still in budget. Things to remember. Okay, couple of things to remember when you're doing budget. Always anticipate emergencies. Okay, budget extra days, budget extra times. Okay, right. I've had happen in the previous workshops that I did before. Right. I think it was the very first one. Somehow on the day where the singer was supposed to record the vocal, okay, the singer could not deliver, right? And it was happening right here in front of them, in front of all the students, and it was actually a great opportunity to showcase how, as a producer, you tackle this kind of situation. You see, So I took that situation and turned it into a learning opportunity, lah. So eventually, what happened is that we just needed to do another day, lah, right? So after the workshop was done, that day was done, that session was done. We got a couple of takes lah, but it was not that great. So just a few days later, with nobody around, I got a singer came in again, and then poof, oh, no problem, nailed it. Okay, so always anticipate. Sometimes on that day, maybe the musician's having a bad day, or singer's feeling a little bit sick. You might have to cancel. You might have to budget. So always anticipate these kind of emergencies lah. Okay, now on the other hand, you don't want to sacrifice too much quality for budget reasons lah. Okay, sometimes because of budget, you feel like you need to sacrifice. You have to sacrifice some things in quality, and what I mean by that, okay, well, what I mean by that, right, is that, for example, if you are setting out to record 10 songs, right, and and then when you're going through the process, you're realizing that, okay, because of budget constraints or how the project is going, if we do 10 songs, we have to compromise lah. Everything, maybe you need to rush, we need to compromise on the quality. Maybe, right? The question you have to ask is, maybe it's better we don't do 10 songs. Let's just do 8 songs, but make sure that the quality is good. Sometimes these are the considerations that you want to think about as well, lah, right? Not just for the sake that, oh, we must put out 10 songs, then you sacrifice, you compromise on the quality. Okay, Sometimes just do less lah. Don't do 10 songs lah. Just do 6 or 7 lah. Okay. But make sure those sound good. Those are the best, right? So don't be, as the saying goes, right? The English saying lah, penny wise, pound foolish. Okay, right? Just because you want to save a little bit here, right? And then in the long term, right? It's a waste. You actually costing money. Now this is obvious, right? You want to use quality, well-maintained instruments. Okay, if you're working with bands, you're working with them, always make sure that they have, sent their instruments for servicing. They've sent it to a tech, fresh strings, new strings. Make sure intonation all is correct, because you don't want all these problems coming and raising its ugly head when you enter the studio lah, right? You don't want to suddenly find out, the guitar is intonation is off. When the intonation is off, you have to either spend time fixing it, or worst case scenario, sometimes when it gets to a part where you need to play, you have to change the tuning, tweak the tuning a little bit. That is wasting time, man. Okay, all right. And then obviously, fresh strings and well-maintained instruments lah. You don't want to be scratchy and all that. Okay, now things to remember as well. Okay, you want to establish a work schedule lah. Okay, as a producer, it's very important to try and establish some kind of work schedule. Now, if I'm working on a big project, I personally would kind of go, if it's a full day, 12 hours maximum, including breaks. So when you talk about when you deal with musicians, are night creatures lah. I'm sure we all know that. Okay, we stay up super late at night. So very typically, if there are any large big projects or something like that, we'll probably usually start around the afternoon, right? Like usually after lunchtime, 1 or 2 p.m. Then if we do like a 12 hours kind of session, including breaks, mind you, so we need to take breaks lah, breaks for tea, breaks for dinner in between. But the day, for me personally, I don't think you should go more than 12 hours lah, max, for the whole thing. So like if you start from 12 noon, you finish and you wrap up by 12 midnight lah. Okay, so everyone can actually go back, get some rest. Now, okay, things to remember as a producer: you always want to motivate, okay, and be flexible, right? Be someone who is always motivating and encouraging the musicians, encouraging the artists to deliver the best, and be flexible, okay, right? Now, there are, of course, very rare. There are some stories, of course, right, or some producers who are the more, who have some very weird styles, okay, or not say weird, who have like maybe some unorthodox kind of methods or styles. So there have been stories. I can't remember exactly who's the name of the producer, right? And he was dealing with the band. So the story related was that, you know, he wanted to get the singer in a state of really being angry and pissed off, because he wanted that emotion coming through the vocal. So during the session, he insulted the singer. He got them. He insulted them. He put him down, and did all that. So the singer was really mad. He was really pissed. He was really getting upset. And then he did the vocal. Then the producer said, "Yes, I got it. That's exactly the take I want from you." So now that is actually a reverse psychology thing lah. So your mileage may vary, your success rate may not be very high if you do that. So sometimes it may work, but I personally prefer not to do that sort of thing lah. Okay, right? If you want to make someone sound tired, okay. Another example is, right. Okay, make the singer go and run 5 times round your taman, and come back. Then you do the vocal, right? That's a little bit extreme lah. But sometimes you hear funny stories of that. Okay, you can try it at your own risk lah. Okay, if you want to do this sort of thing. Okay, right. But for me, I'm always the motivating, and my style is always more motivation, right? And positive reinforcement. Okay, another thing. One thing to remember when it comes to budget, when it comes to being a producer: be prepared to say no. All right, right. You are not there to function and say as a yes person, or to agree onto everything. Be prepared, all right, as a leader, right? Someone who's been entrusted, and hopefully the band and the artist realizes and acknowledges that early on lah. As someone who is the producer, right? Technically, the producer has the veto rights usually, right? When I'm working in a band, it's a democracy, right? Everyone has their opinions, right? And then majority will win. But when it comes to certain things, right, all right, if the producer needs to say no, means no, right? So, instance, just now Colin asked, how about the singer, right? If the singer really cannot do it, I say, okay, no, right? You are not cutting it, you're not delivering. Maybe let's not record a vocal. Okay, because in a band you can't really kick the singer out loud, right? Unless you can, right? change the singer, change the vocalist, right? Okay, right. But be prepared to say no, right? And no means doesn't necessarily mean no, we cannot do it, we can't do it. Maybe no means say maybe no, we can't do it now. Okay, let's do it later, right? For example, okay, that's back to where being flexible is, lah, right? Okay, let's go to very quickly. Let's talk about the digital audio workstation. Okay. Now, obviously, as a producer, right, these are the things you want to choose. You want to think about. Okay. If you, especially if you're working with collaborating with other producers or with other musicians or working at other studios, right, you want to think about what DAW they are using because you want to. It's for workflow purposes. Okay. So, for example, there's Pro Tools, Cubase, Logic, Studio One, Ableton, Cakewalk, Reaper. Okay, I'll just go very quickly lah. We don't really need to look at this too much in detail. Okay, so very quickly now, earlier on I mentioned, right, there are the types of producers, different styles of producers. Now I'll go through this list very briefly to show you the different kinds of producers. Now these categories are not clear cut. It doesn't mean that oh, it's type A is always type A1. Sometimes there is a type AB. Sometimes there's a type ABC. There's always sometimes a combination. So you look at this list and ask yourself the question: what type of producer am I? What kind of character I am? Okay, am I this type or that type? Okay, so the first one, okay, the musician producer, right? So this one, the musician producer they're usually okay. They're part of the band, they are a band, they are a musician, they come from a very musical background, right? And so a musician producer. So musician producers are usually good because they they usually understand how the band feels, they understand where the band and where the artist comes from, lah, right? Now then there's the second type, the engineer producer. These are the ones who are the very technical, the geeky types of producers, right? They love to be very hands on, right? They come from a very technical aspect and the point of view. Number three, the music fan producer. Very early on, actually, most of the producers, especially in the earlier days, right, 70s, 80s, they kind of fall into this category. They themselves are not the ones, may not play instrument, they may not play in a band. They're not the ones who know how to operate the console or know how to operate the DAW, but they are a fan of the music. They know how to appreciate, they appreciate the songs, they appreciate the band, and they can identify, right? They have a certain taste to it. So these music fan producers, right, can actually be some of the most successful, most well-known producers, right, are actually that sort of type. They may not have any musical background or technical or engineering background, but they can become good producers, right? These are the types like earlier I mentioned. They know how to pull a good team together. They know how to identify. They can spot, oh, wow, this band, I'm a fan of them because they write great songs. They're a great band, so they have a great potential. So some people are able to spot it that way. These are what we call the music fan producers. And now, the fourth type is the songwriter producer. Okay, so these are usually the ones who are a little bit more. They're more come from a much more emotional, personal place, right? Because they are the ones who wrote the song, right? They wrote the song. They wrote that song, and then they want to see that song being produced right into the final outcome. Songwriter producers usually are good in the sense that they usually have vision. They have good vision of what they want their song to sound like in the end, you see. So sometimes it's good to be coming from a songwriter. Okay, the next one, and this is the funny one. The default producer. Okay, what do I mean by the default producer? Okay, This is always in the situation and very common with bands that come into a studio lah, and they don't have a producer, they self-produce, right? But the band comes in, they're usually always in the band. There's always ends up being the default producer, okay? And so by default, you see, they not no one appointed them, no one hired them, no one elected them. Say, okay, you are going to be producer. It's like by default, looks like, you know, looks like I'm the producer lah, okay, right? Uh, Now, default producer, this kind of thing also very often happens to engineers, studio engineers. Okay, all right. Don't know, Hazlan, maybe Jack, you can relate to that. Sometimes the band come in, right? You got no direction. They came in, they call you, oh, we want to record the song, right? Right, but they supposedly they self-produce, they have no direction at all. And then in the end, by default, you end up having to become the producer for the project because they had no direction, they don't know what they're doing or where they're going. Then you have to by default step in, right? Hopefully with their permission, and with the understanding that you have to come in as a producer lah. That's what I mean by default producer. Okay, by default you just happen to become the producer because no one was there to do the job. Okay, next one, the studio owner producer. Okay, so this is also very relatable. There are also those who are, who are the studio owners. They own or they manage a production studio, and then they take projects lah. They will take projects. Maybe they will pick and they scout the projects, and then take on and handle the projects. Right. So they become the producer by default because they own the studio. Okay. Well, I'm very often, as I said, there's no clear cut, only one type. All of us are a combination of a different of these lah. Okay, right. Next one, the grid iron. Okay, grid iron producer. What is the grid iron? So grid iron is like, we talk about the grid, the grill, like the window grill. So grid iron. So grid iron refers to those who are, everything had to be perfect. you know, when you record the drums later, oh, everything must quantize. Kita must quantize everything perfect on the grid one. The bass, the vocal, everything we quantize or tuning, everything tuned perfect. So there are some producers who are this type lah. Okay, all right. Some of them can be good, but most of the time, if you are a good iron producer, when you are the ultimate perfectionist, sometimes the music ends up a little bit boring. Okay, some imperfections, some flaws, some kind of ugliness, some kind of imperfections in a song, in a recording. Sometimes there's the beauty in that. Okay, right. Move on. A couple more. Okay, continued. The Luddite. Okay, Luddite. Okay, so Luddite is actually a term of it refers to a group of people who, all right, who are called the Luddites. All right, so Luddites are the one who they eschew all the latest technology. They are the purist phenotype. Is like, we must record with everything must be on tape, must record on analog tape, 8-track cassette, no click track, right? Band cannot use click track. Everything must be tube. This one you must use the tube one, must be. So these are old fashioned. They always stick. They don't like no digital, right? Don't like digital equipment. Digital pedal, no, not nice. Analog delay, must use analog delay. For example, right? So there are sometimes people who are like that lah. Okay, all right. Oh, must be using a tube compressor, tube microphone. Okay, all right. No digital nonsense, for example. Okay. Now the hip hop producer. Okay, all right. Okay. So right again, don't get me wrong. Okay. So especially when it comes to hip hop, very often what we often traditionally refer to as the arranger, the one who created or who composed the music, the beat, right? Very often in the hip hop world, they themselves end up, all right, being classified and being called the producer themselves lah. Okay, so right, this is just something to be aware of, right? Because when you talk about pop and rock, sometimes the producer is not necessarily the one that create or arrange the music. There's an arranger, but very often in hip hop, it's the same person. Okay, now the absentee producer. This one, and no joke, it happens. Okay, right? So absentee producer is the producer sometimes they'll be there during the very first session, okay? All right. They'll come in during the first session. They'll talk with you. They talk with the engineer. Oh, how's everything going? How's the band going? All right. Okay. Okay. You all do your sound check. Everything first, lah. Okay. When you're ready, call me. They'll do recording. First take. First take. Okay. All right. Everything seems to be okay. All right. I gotta go somewhere first. I'll chow first. Update me lah later. Okay. All right. So there are actually, I hope that you guys don't end up being these kind of producers lah, okay? Right? So sometimes they will come back, sometimes might not even come back in the session. They will like, come back. They might not even show up again, right? So there are some styles of producers who are like that, okay? And there are some who can be successful that way, especially those who are like the music fan type, who maybe they have very good taste, they can discern, right? So usually some of these types, again, it's not 100% negative lah, okay? Sometimes they will listen back and then they will determine, they can tell, okay, it's good, you know, or it's bad or something like that. We need to redo, right? So, but I hope we don't end up, you guys don't end up being the absentee type of producer lah. Okay, right. So you have the hands-on producer, okay? So you have the producer who is really hands-on on everything. Everything also they want to help, they want to involve in everything, making everything they do themselves, right? There are some which are very, very hands-on, okay? That can be a good thing as well, all right? All right, okay. Then there is always the self-producer lah, right? It could be the person who wrote the song, everything they do themselves, right? Everything they self-produce on their own. Again, nothing wrong with that, but there's always challenges, right, to produce yourself lah. Okay, armchair producer. Armchair producer is like the absentee, right? But is the direct opposite of the hands-on lah. Armchair producer is the one who sits down in his armchair, in the session, check the phone, while the session is going on. Then engineers get sir, how's the take? Everything. Oh, what? Oh, sorry, I wasn't listening. Can you play that again? those are the that's what I call the armchair producers. They are there in the session, but sometimes yet they're not there. That's what I mean. Okay. Now again, there are people who are successful like that, who are good producers as well. It's just their style of working lah. Okay. Then related to the self producer and the default producer, there's always sometimes the band member producer lah. Very often in every band there'll always be that one um more creative head, or maybe it's usually the guy, the band member, who's the one who's got the equipment, who's got the whole recording equipment. Usually by default, all right, they become the producer one. Okay, so that was me when I was in my band. I was the one who came from the audio engineering background. I was the one who had the home studio and equipment. By default, I become the producer lah. Okay, so that is the scenario, the situation. Right, is there any more? Yeah, that's the last one. Okay, so those are different types. So I mentioned earlier, right, the look at chart, and you saw a sneak peek. Okay, this is an example of a progress chart that we do. So I do this for fun. Usually I take this, actually a mahjong paper that I will stick up on the wall, and I think recently one of the bands actually posted on their social media, they did something like that, and then it was something that was fun for the fans to do lah. So I usually break it down. On the left, you see are the song titles. Okay, the left column, right, is all the song titles, and then the top column will be all the parts. So you have drums, bass, guitar 1, guitar 2, keyboards. This song got 2 vocalists, so there's Vox 1, Vox 2, and then the mix, right? The mixing progress. So I always have this, right, inside at the studio. So every time they come in, they look at the progress, and then when the drummer finish, I was like, okay, nah, you go and mark it, go and draw thunder, so it gives them a sense of accomplishment. It's like, oh, okay, I've done it, I've done that. And then some of them, of course, have a little bit more fun, right? They start doing their own icon, they start doing their own drawing, they start doing their own stuff, right? And then they take it back lah. So visually, you can actually see, right? It helps when you can visually see how your progress is, right? It keeps everyone on track. Okay, we know, okay, this one not done yet, this is not done, okay. Then you can also kind of calculate as well, because you see the number of boxes. So for example, if you have 5 songs and five boxes, then if you have ticked if you have managed to tick like 5 boxes out of the 25, then you know your your EP progress is 20%, your 20% progress rate, right? So it's more of a mental and psychological boost, lah, right? Okay, we know we're getting work done. Yes, that's progress. Okay, so this is just one example of whatever you can do, lah. All right. Okay, cool. Right. So obviously you see there was one song that was cancelled. There's one song there that does not have drums, no bass, just a guitar and keyboards and one vocal. Yeah. And they started drawing the drummer at the end. The last 2 songs started drawing funny signs and drawing a kampong house lah, drawing a dog there, I think, whatever. Okay, yeah. So they can have fun with this. Cool. All right. So just to sum up, okay, production is vision and leadership. Okay, you need to have vision, you need to have leadership. To become a producer, to be someone who's a good producer, you want to consider taking classes, right? So hopefully that's why you are here. Okay, you are here for this workshop, yeah, taking these classes. But there are also a lot of other online programs or classes, or even signing up and going to for classes in any of the audio or the music schools that offer these kind of courses lah. Consider that, okay? How to become a better producer? Collaborate with other producers, right? So that's also actually a good way to improve your own skills, is to work with other people, right? So you don't always just have to rely on your own stuff. Find people to work with and to collaborate with, okay? So sometimes they will complement you with their skills and their experience, and sometimes you will bring your own skills and your experience to the table. Okay, right. Explore different styles or genres. Okay, go outside of your comfort zone, right? Go out of the box, right? Explore different styles, different types of genres. Okay, very important. Learn how to make a budget, right? Learn how to manage and work out a budget, right? Because that's a very useful skill, accounting skill and all that. All right, and especially when you're handling bigger projects. And then obviously you want to learn how to use your music production tools, right? Your DAW, your software. You want to learn how do you all of that as well. Unless you decide to become an armchair style producer lah, okay? You just want to direct people, okay, you do this, you do that. Okay, get feedback and learn, right? So get feedback in the sense that join, go be a part of all the different communities. Go and find a Facebook group or a forum or something like that. Share your work out there, get feedback from other people, get criticism. Yes, no, doesn't matter if your initial work sucks or it sounds bad or anything. Never mind, it's okay. Get it out and get the feedback. That's one of the best ways to learn and to improve, is to have other people critique your work. Okay, get organized. All right, okay. I can't emphasize. I've mentioned the word organize so often. And last but not least, okay, very important, right? Always work with a contract. Okay. Now, I'm not going to go so much detail because that is music business. That one is a music business course already. That one different workshop. I have to call a different person to do it. All right. But very important, just to know. All right. To learn about the business side of things and how important it is to always work with a contract, lah. Okay. Right. So that brings me to the end of the first segment, right? Music production 101. Let's take a 5-minute break and then we'll continue with the second topic, okay?